They're on a plane.
Where's this?
I'll tell you sometime, but it's under investigation right now. But they came from a certain city, and this person was coming to the Republican National Convention. This was a first-hand account of a plane going from Washington to wherever, and I'll see if I can get that information for you.
The folks at the recount showing how, in his two tellings of a conspiracy theory about some kind of Antifa plane, the destination city had changed in a matter of hours. The baseless story matches a rumor that went around Facebook 3 months ago. Thank you, Facebook.
Facebook spreading lies again.
We need to do a little bit of coverage in the coming weeks, Joe, on Facebook, especially given that TED Talk we watched. That was incredible.
Yeah, we
will do this. Let's bring in White House correspondent for Reuters, Jeff Mason, who was on the president's trip to Kenosha, Wisconsin yesterday. Also with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter covering racial injustice for the New York Times, Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Great to have you both. For both of you for being with us. Jeff Mason, the president trotting out some conspiracy theories like ninjas dressed in black filling up airplanes or whatever he's saying. He does the whole, I'll get those names for you. Also
later,
trotting out a series of conspiracy theories that Laura Ingraham was correcting him about. Why are we seeing a president who's always been prone to pass around conspiracy theories? Doesn't it seem like we're seeing an acceleration of those conspiracy theories of late?
You know, people ask me things like that. Is this getting worse, or is his mental state changing? I'm always reluctant to say yes, because we just have seen this up and down over the 3.5 years of his presidency. But we did ask him about that yesterday. I asked him that follow-up that you just played on the tarmac of Andrews, and his answer was, as your viewers just saw, that it had to do with one in particular person, and maybe he'd get that person in touch with me and the rest of the pool. We certainly haven't heard back about that. And also yesterday, when I asked the White House about this, they weren't able to pinpoint a specific flight. They weren't able to give any details about what the threat was. If, in fact, that had been a serious threat, it would have been a major thing for the country that the White House would have needed to comment on.
Yeah, and so they didn't do that because chances are very good it never happened. Jeff, let's talk about, I want to make sure that I've got this right. It seemed to me yesterday and over the past week, the president has steadfastly refused to criticize the actions of a 17-year-old boy who went over state lines with an AR-15 that he was illegally carrying around, killed 2 people, and the president has not criticized him, and many of his supporters in the media have actually praised Kyle Rittenhouse. Did you hear the president do anything to condemn Mr. Rittenhouse or other supporters of his and their violence, be it in Kenosha or in Portland?
No, quite the opposite. He's spent the last few days defending Rittenhouse, saying that he was violently attacked. On the other hand, he's not offering the same level of support for Jacob Blake. And during his trip to Kenosha yesterday, did not meet with Jacob Blake's family. He did meet with the pastor of Jacob Blake's mother, but it was striking, Joe, yesterday at that roundtable that he held with law enforcement and with business leaders from the community, that the 2 people at that table who were African American were pastors at the church that Jacob Blake's mother attends. But they were not invited to talk about some of the racial issues that the press corps was asking. And the president, when asked about very directly whether he believed in systemic racism being a problem in the country, turned it back to law enforcement and did not really let the pastor speak, who we had actually directed that particular question to. And I thought it was also striking that the female pastor Ward said, Mrs. Ward said, she was there yesterday because she thought it was important that Black people be at the table. And they were the only 2.
Yeah, Nicole, also striking, if we do want to make a list of all of the things that were striking yesterday, we need to add to that list that while Joe Biden was condemning violence on both sides, Donald Trump, who's claiming to be the law and order president, steadfastly refusing to condemn violence that comes from his own supporters.
Yes, the message here is very clear and also very disheartening for people who are marching in the streets, who are trying to simply argue against police brutality and who are demanding some consequence when they face police brutality. So to see a defense of a young man who broke the law, who carried a assault rifle across state lines, who was also out after curfew, and no actual true empathy for Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times by an armed agent of the state. And as you mentioned earlier on the show, in fact, Trump actually compared this armed agent, who is highly trained, who shot Jacob Blake in the back, with someone choking in a golf tournament. I can't tell you how deeply painful that is to protesters of all races who are out there marching for accountability, and the inability for this president to give any empathy to the fact that there is a systemic problem. I mean, there's research. His own FBI put out research saying that white supremacists have infiltrated law enforcement. We know that there's a very long history of racialized policing. That is why people are in the streets right now. And as Biden did, one can say that you should not be destroying property, and also say that you should not have to have the type of violence that Black communities are facing that is leading people to be in the streets right now. You can condemn both of these things, and it's a choice not to do so.
Yeah, you two things can be true at the same time. But again, talking about things that were striking yesterday, the president refused to admit that there is a systemic problem when it comes to race, while Joe Biden is able to say that there is, but he understands that the majority of police officers, when they put on that badge, are risking their lives and doing the best that they can. But Nicole, is there obviously the picture, the images of a Black man getting shot 7 times in the back? Those actions obviously suggest there's a serious problem. But also, how about the act of omission by those police officers who had people screaming, he just shot people, and a white boy with an AR-15 around his neck, with his hands in the air, approaches police officers, and they just drive past him. And they just let him go. Even though everybody's screaming at the cops, he just shot 2 people.
I think that's probably one of the most glaring examples, because oftentimes we see these videos that are coming from different places where a white person who is resisting arrest or is being disrespectful to law enforcement is treated very differently than a Black person. But this was in the same city, the same police department, and a police department that was guarding and patrolling because of protests against brutality complaint against its own officer. And to see that the police, when they pass Rittenhouse, were actually responding to gunshots. So they know that someone has been shot, and they go right past this young white man who was carrying an assault rifle.
Unbelievable.
You can't even imagine in your head this happening if that young man were a Black man. And this is happening after months and months of sustained protests against police brutality, that this could still happen right now with all of the scrutiny on police departments, with this being kind of in the daily lexicon, I think really speaks to the issue. And the last thing I want to say is, Trump, they spent a lot of time at the Republican National Convention talking about Joe Biden and the crime bill and painting Joe Biden as someone who actually has implemented a program of systemic racism. And now they're trying to deny that systemic racism exists and paint Biden as some anti-law and order radical. And it just doesn't jibe together.
No.
So, Jeff Mason, obviously, group here and a lot of the people that we talk to study leadership on a daily basis. But what was the reaction in Kenosha to Trump's words, to the way he spoke with cops in the area with that round table? Was there any? And among the business owners, I know there was a bit of a backstory as to how they got some business owners to come forward and sort of stand with the president.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the reaction that we see, when you're traveling with the president, you're in a little bit of a bubble. So you see the people who they bring, and the people who came yesterday and the business that the president first visited are clearly in pain and have reason to be. They've suffered a lot. But to go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of what was striking is, there are two pieces of that story, and there are two sides of that community that are suffering. And the president's trip was designed really only to focus on the one, and that was the business community that has been hurt by these protests, and not to offer words of encouragement or empathy to those who are concerned and hurt by racial divisions.
Jeff Mason and Nicole Hannah-Jones, thank you both for being on this morning.
And thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.